For centuries, the world has feared one name, the Vikings. They have been remembered as savage raiders, bloodthirsty warriors, men who burned villages and worshipped violence. History painted them as monsters. But what if that story is incomplete? The word Viking did not mean warrior. It came from the Old Norse word vikinger, someone who went on an expedition by sea. It was not a nationality, not a tribe, not even a race. The Vikings were Norse people from Scandinavia, modern Norway, Sweden and Denmark. Most of them were farmers. Yes, farmers. They grew barley, they raised livestock, they built wooden longhouses and lived with their families. Only a small percentage ever went raiding. But when they did, Europe remembered. In 793 AD, a monastery on the island of Lindisfarne was attacked. Monks were killed, treasures were stolen, churches were burned. Christian Europe was shocked. To them, these attackers were demons from the sea. But the truth was far more human. Scandinavia was harsh, short growing seasons, limited farmland, population growth, young men without inheritance. The choice was simple: stay and struggle, or sail and take risks. They chose the sea. Were they violent? Yes and no. Every kingdom in Europe was at war. The Franks fought constantly. The Anglo-Saxons battled for territory. The Byzantines crushed rebellions. War was normal. What made the Vikings terrifying was not their brutality. It was their speed. Their long ships were engineering masterpieces, lightweight, flexible, fast. They appeared without warning, struck quickly, and vanished. They were not unstoppable, they were unpredictable. But the story is not purely heroic. The Vikings participated in the slave trade. They captured people in raids and sold them in markets stretching from Eastern Europe to the Middle East. Silver coins from Baghdad have been found in Viking burial sites. They were connected to a global trade network. Warriors by reputation, merchants by reality. Nearly 500 years before Columbus, Viking explorers reached North America. Led by Leif Erikson, they established a short-lived settlement in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. They crossed the Atlantic without modern navigation tools. They were explorers. Viking women had rights. In much of medieval Europe, women were property. But in Norse society, women could own land, inherit property, and even initiate divorce. Their society had law. They gathered in assemblies called things. Disputes were settled. Justice was organized. This was not chaos, it was structured civilization. The Vikings did not disappear. They evolved. They converted to Christianity. They formed kingdoms. They integrated into European politics. The Viking Age ended, but their descendants shaped medieval Europe. So, who were the Vikings? Monsters? Number saints? Not that either. They were complex, ambitious, adaptive, human, and perhaps we are still living in the world they helped shape. But unpredictability was only part of their power. To truly understand the Vikings, you must leave the battlefield and step inside their world. Imagine the north. Cold winds cutting across dark fjords, mountains rising like walls from the sea, long winters, short summers, thin soil that barely fed a family. Life was not easy. A Viking child did not grow up dreaming of conquest. He grew up learning to survive. He learned to farm rocky land, to repair wooden roofs, to fish in freezing waters, to carve tools from bone and iron. Strength was not born in war, it was born in necessity. Inside their longhouses, families gathered around a central fire. Smoke rose slowly toward the roof vents. Stories were told in the flicker of flame, stories of gods, of Odin, who sacrificed his eye for wisdom, of Thor, protector of mankind, of Ragnarok, the end of the world. Their religion was not blind savagery, it was poetry, it was philosophy. It was a way to explain a harsh and unpredictable world. When young men left on expeditions, it was not always for glory. Sometimes it was for land, sometimes for silver, sometimes simply for a chance at a better life. Their ships were their greatest achievement. Longships were built with overlapping planks, flexible enough to survive open oceans, yet light enough to travel shallow rivers. They could strike deep inland, Paris, Seville, Constantinople. No place felt unreachable, but they were not only raiders. In the markets of York and Dublin, Viking traders exchanged furs, honey, amber, and iron. Arab silver coins travelled north, Scandinavian goods travelled south. They were part of a vast network that connected Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. This was not isolation. This was globalization, centuries before the word existed. And yet, the violence was real. Villages burned, lives were taken, families were torn apart. The attack on Lindisfarne in 793 was not just a raid, it was a shockwave. Monks who believed their island protected by God watched ships rise from the mist. Warriors moved fast, precise, relentless. Europe would never forget that day, but Europe itself was not peaceful. Kingdoms rose and fell in constant war. Power was taken by sword and shield everywhere. The Vikings were not unique in brutality. They were unique in mobility. They mastered movement, and movement changed history. They reached Iceland, they settled Greenland, and around the year 1000 they stood on the shores of North America. Leif Erikson and his crew built a settlement in what we now call Newfoundland. It did not last, but it happened. Nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. They were not just warriors, they were explorers of the unknown. And over time, something changed. Raiding became ruling, warriors became kings. The land known as Normandy was founded by Norse settlers. The rulers of England carried Viking blood. The so-called barbarians entered European politics. They converted to Christianity. They built churches. They governed territories. The Viking Age did not end in destruction, it ended in transformation. So who were the Vikings? They were not the monsters of legend, but they were not saints either. They were ambitious, resourceful, adaptive. They built, they traded, they fought, they explored. They shaped the medieval world in ways few others did. History often prefers simple stories, heroes, villains, civilized, barbaric. But reality is rarely simple. The Vikings were human, driven by fear, by hope, by hunger, by opportunity, and perhaps that is why their story still captivates us. Because in their struggle to survive, to expand, to adapt, we see something familiar. The world they sailed across is the world we inherited, and in many ways, we are still living in the wake of their ships.